Hi, I'm Jamie with the Chegg Tutors. Today I want to talk to you about the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, or the Whorf hypothesis, a particular idea in linguistics that still has a lot of importance, even though a lot of it has been discredited. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, what we call the strong version, is linguistic determinism. This says that language determines thought. People who speak different languages fundamentally don't think the same way. This strong Whorf hypothesis has been mostly discredited. We know today, through studies of the brain and much more advanced studies of non-linguistic thinking, that there are many areas of thought where we don't use language at all, and there the language can't determine the thought. There's also the weak Whorf hypothesis, which has much more influence today and much more validity to many scientists, saying simply that language influences thought. Let's look a little bit into the evidence for each of these. So Whorf, in his original studies, used data from lesser studied languages like Hopi, an indigenous language in North America. He didn't form a testable hypothesis, and a lot of the criticism of his research is based on his methods, which some say were based on anecdote or story, and others say just simply weren't rigorous enough or weren't well defined enough. They said, for example, that when Whorf gave examples from other languages that were untranslatable, he was in fact negating his own hypothesis by translating them into English. He did focus on how direct translation is not always possible. For example, he was interested in how one language might have multiple words for a concept that only has one word in another language. For example, Hopi has words for a natural body of water as distinct from water in a container. If we were translating from English to Hopi, there'd be some ambiguity about which word for water we should use. One of the more famous things that he thought about was how he thought the Inuit have many words for snow, many more than we do in English, and that allowed them to be more nuanced about their description of snow. Maybe they distinguish more between a light, wet sort of snow and a light, fluffy sort of snow, just as an example. This has been totally discredited later. The Inuit do not, in fact, have so many words for snow. But this sort of thinking was what was really important to linguistic determinists. Later on, Brown and Lenneberg, two researchers, are the first to formulate a testable hypothesis related to Whorf's research. Is it easier for English speakers to remember color shades for which they have a specific name? In other words, we have names like blue and green, and we even have turquoise or cyan. Is it harder to remember shades between blue and green that we don't have a specific name for? In their studies, speakers of Zuni and English were asked to recognize and remember colors. Zuni speakers classify green and blue together. They don't have separate words for the two. And in fact, they did have trouble remembering the shades or the nuances within the green-blue category. It took longer for them to respond, and there were more often inaccurate responses when asked to remember the colors. This was some evidence for linguistic relativism, though certainly not linguistic determinism. There's been a lot of research since then that really focuses on areas like color, where it's much easier to form testable hypotheses and take good data that's not simply anthropological data. Nowadays, there are challenges from linguistic universalists like Steven Pinker, who say all languages have the same underlying structure. This is in direct opposition to linguistic relativism, which would say language influences thought. Because there are different languages, there are different structures to it, and therefore different thoughts. An example that universalists use is that languages with only 3 color words invariably always have black, white, and red. Other people, like cognitive linguists today, say there are whole domains of thought that are not at all linguistic. Again, this discredits linguistic determinism, but not necessarily linguistic relativism. It says there's a lot more to thought than language, but it doesn't deny that there may be a link and an influence between language and thought. There's a lot that's been discredited about Whorf's original hypothesis, but it's still worth considering and birthed a lot of really important fields in modern linguistics and modern cognitive science. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.